We are very pleased tonight to call on two colleagues. First, on the ground in Michigan, Newsmax chief political columnist and White House correspondent John Gizzi, and of course, standing by, Newsmax New York. You just saw him mere moments ago, and you can see him each weeknight at 7 on the eponymously named Steve Malzberg show. He's got his dukes up. He's ready for action. We'll let him continue that bit of punching bag work, but right now, setting the scene from Michigan, John Gizzi. John, what's going on?
This is the largest turnout in the history of the Michigan primary, JD. More than 1 million voters are expected to turn out before all of the polls close in the water wonderland. I've just returned from the community center here in Troy, Michigan, in Oakland County. They were already breaking their past records, and in the end, as 8 o'clock came, a time when the numbers are usually dwindling, I saw the long lines out there. So, if nothing else, there's going to be a huge turnout.
Well, that is good to know because, Steve Malzberg, earlier this afternoon, we saw some scenes from various polling places in both Michigan and Mississippi, and perhaps because it was the mid-afternoon and most Republicans were at work, they weren't there to vote. But your take on the possibility of a high turnout, as John Gizzi is reporting tonight from Troy, Steve?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, you would think if we could go by what's happened around the country so far, record turnout on the Republican side anyway seems to favor Donald Trump. Now, earlier in my show an hour ago, we had Roger Stone on, who, you know, may have been looking to dampen expectations for Trump to some extent. And he said that these negative ads that are running all over the place constantly, and as he put it, are having an effect. And he says that Trump should be able to win Michigan, but only by a couple of 3 points. Don't look for any, you know, double-digit win. That would be out of the question. So we will see how these record numbers translate on the Republican side. It's very exciting.
John Gizzi, obviously you have not been able to conduct your own poll, but you have been speaking to people there anecdotally. And as you have had the chance to visit with voters on the ground in Troy, Michigan, and elsewhere around Michigan, what is it you are hearing from those voters?
All right. Obviously, it all depends on who you talk to, JD, and as you say, it's anecdotal. But I find an unusually large amount of support for John Kasich. Many people freely volunteering that they made up their mind to vote for the Ohio governor at the last moment. Rocky Raskowski, former majority leader of the State House of Representatives, past candidate for U.S. Senator, told me he decided once he went in the polling booth to vote for Kasich, even though he disagrees with him on the issue of immigration and the Common Core federal education program. Why? Because he thinks he can win, and he thinks overall his fiscal record will be very much one that brings an opportunity society to the U.S.
John Gizzi, go ahead, sir. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead, sir.
No, and I also spoke to a woman who voted for Barack Obama twice, Michelle Watson, who is black and a school teacher, and she said she voted for Kasich because I don't like Donald Trump, end of quote. I get a lot of that. That said, Trump's positions on trade and on illegal immigration really resonate, notably in Macomb County, the home of the Reagan Democrats, so no one writes him off for sure.
John Gizzi, tonight from Troy, Michigan. John, we know you have on your Walter Winchell Memorial hat there, so you will be out talking to other voters, and we will check in with you again a little bit later. Steve Malzberg, back to you. As John was setting up the dynamic, what he was hearing anecdotally from a couple of voters who decided late and opted for Ohio Governor John Kasich, you touched on it earlier, the dynamic of the frontrunner and the fact that because Donald Trump is that front runner, everyone is concentrating their slings, their arrows, their criticism, and yes, their TV ads against the Donald.
Yeah, well, of course, the newest controversy, all of a sudden, if you ask someone, and jokingly in good spirit, to raise your right hand at a rally and solemnly swear to vote for me. I mean, I could see myself doing that if I had the opportunity. All of a sudden, that's Hitler-like. Glenn Beck holding up papers on Stephanopoulos' show this week on Sunday to prove that Trump is Hitler-like. You're getting it from all ends. David Brooks of the New York Times on one of the shows Sunday, never a true Republican in my view, but nonetheless says that for the good of the Republican Party, it would be worth it to sacrifice the presidency this time around to save the party. I mean, my God, not even alluding to what that would mean for the Supreme Court and this country for the next 50 years. I just think that Trump is getting hit by everybody and everything. Implications, Romney, there's something in his taxes. Cruz then echoing that. Of course, Rubio has gone negative. If he withstands this and wins Michigan and wins Mississippi and wins Florida, he's going to be very, very tough to beat. He's going to show that he has resiliency. On the other hand, I don't know. You got people walking in there at the last minute saying, well, maybe this guy's Hitler. Maybe he's a Nazi. I'm hearing it from so many people. I don't know how this is going to play out.
It has been my experience in politics, and having had my name on the ballot 7 times, I have seen this parade, especially in presidential elections, where candidates of both parties, when anyone compares them to Hitler, it usually redounds to their benefit. I can remember a campaign rally, Greensboro, North Carolina, on election eve 1972, when the Nixon folks actually brought in the counterculture, the hippies, if you will, and they had signs written Nixon with the S as a swastika. It's worth noting that President Nixon won a landslide that following Tuesday. Let's continue our conversation now by calling in a couple of other people who have run and won elective office. First up, the Lieutenant Governor, the former Lieutenant Governor of the Empire State of New York, Betsy McCoy, Skyping in tonight from Connecticut, and via Skype from Michigan, my old congressional colleague, Pete Hoekstra, the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. We thank you for your time tonight in our special coverage. And Betsy, ladies first, the sustained criticism and the Hitler label and the Hitler similarities, analogies that I think are completely inappropriate, being leveled at Donald Trump. How will that play out?
Well, I agree with you. To most people, this is ironic and frankly disgraceful. Donald Trump has assembled the coalition that the Republicans have dreamed of for so long. He's raised the enthusiasm level in the Republican Party. He's garnering so much support from outside the party as people scramble to enroll as Republicans and vote in these primaries. They should be down on their knees thanking Donald Trump for igniting this kind of enthusiasm.
And even as Trump has ignited enthusiasm to what used to be called Reagan Democrats, and some have dubbed them Donald's Democrats, Pete Hoekstra, we were seeing some footage of Trump, and we saw very briefly a tweet about Donald not showing up at CPAC. Now, the candidate you're supporting, again, another one of our former House colleagues, now Ohio Governor John Kasich, showed up at CPAC, and he's been working hard in Michigan. Pete, since you're a Michigan voter and you're a Kasich guy, we know you're kind of seeing things John's way, but tell me how you're feeling about Kasich and his campaign tonight.
I think we're feeling very positive about John's campaign tonight. We had a great weekend, big crowds. We had big crowds on Monday and again today in Lansing at the final rally at noon today. It's all going to depend, I think, on how many voters voted early. We've got early voting or absentee voting. I voted absentee on Friday. My precinct, they said, hey, there have been a lot of folks voting early. And then today, Michigan's reporting record turnout at the polls. So we've got a lot of people coming to the polls today. Certain locations, they've been running out of ballots. So there's a lot of interest. We're confident the late-breaking voters were going to John by probably double digits over Donald Trump, but it's all the mix. Who voted early? Who's voted today? Who decided to come out to vote today just because they, for the first time in a long time, I think since 1988, Michigan actually makes a difference in a presidential primary.
One other quick question, Pete. Let me just ask you to turn weatherman for a second. What kind of weather did you guys have across Michigan today?
Oh, it was awesome. It was a Michigan Chamber of Commerce day. It was somewhere between 60 and 70 degrees. It was an ideal day for voters to get out and go to the polls.
Wow, that's something as you're basking in relative warmth for early March there in Michigan. Steve Malzberg, back to you because a couple of other candidates figure in tonight's proceedings, a pair of senators, one from Texas, one from Florida, and it appears that, like ships in the night, their fortunes, at least prior to counting the ballots this evening, are changing greatly. Your take on the ascendancy of Ted Cruz and what seems to be genuine difficulties for Marco Rubio.
Yeah, I think, if Rubio should finish in fourth place tonight in Michigan, and I think there's a very good chance that that could happen, you have to start wondering if those reports yesterday of some of his top advisors suggesting he get out before Florida so he doesn't tarnish his reputation even more are true or unfounded. I think there might be a good chance that he could get out. I think the rise of Cruz it coincides with the problems, the shrinking of Trump's numbers. There's a new national poll out tonight. Wall Street Journal, NBC News, closest it's ever been, except for one CNN poll that actually had Cruz leading nationally a few weeks ago, but that was never repeated. You got Trump at 30, Cruz at 27, and Kasich at 22, and Rubio at 20. So if that's a true indicator, then the negative ads are working, and I think that's what Cruz is really riding at this point.
Betsy, go ahead, Betsy.
Actually, let me point out that Cruz is taking votes from Rubio. He's not getting Trump votes. He's getting Rubio votes. But Donald Trump should not want this race to narrow too quickly. In other words, if Trump cleans up in Florida against Rubio, against Kasich in Ohio, if he knocks them out, and it quickly becomes a two-person race, that's not so good for Donald Trump. The reason that he's flying high is that there are so many people in the race, and he wants to keep it that way a little longer.
No, that's absolutely true. Yet Trump goes around, Betsy, saying, "I want Rubio one-on-one. I want Cruz one-on-one." In that same national poll, and this has been, indicated before. Trump one-on-one doesn't do well against Cruz, doesn't do well against Rubio if Cruz is out of the mix either, and I haven't seen the numbers against Kasich. So I think Donald Trump's best hope is, and I think he could win Michigan, he could win Florida, he could win Ohio, but I think if it's just him and Cruz and Kasich, it's going to be a lot more difficult for Trump than if everybody stays in.
Well, obviously, we're going to have a whole lot more clarity in about 8 days. The polls are now closed in Michigan, so we'll start seeing results and probably have a very good indication within the next 60 minutes. But then when the polls close in Ohio and Florida, then I think, we'll probably see the shape that this race is going to take for the next month to 2 months.
Also, this is a very important state, not simply because of the number of delegates, but also because Michigan symbolizes the theme of the Republican race this time around, which is that Americans have lost jobs. They're the victims of rotten trade deals. They're the victims of a terrible Obama economy. It is the number one issue in Michigan, and that's why this state is such a bellwether.
I think that's right. That's what all the candidates have been talking about, except the Democrat candidates have also been talking about the Flint water crisis, and that's indicative of the crumbling infrastructure that we have around the country. The Midwest, very much could be the bellwether for how the Republican nomination is going to go, but it's also maybe a bellwether for how the national election is going to go in November, because you're absolutely right. Jobs, trade agreements, those are the kinds of issues that have been so important to the voters in Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania.
And again, for the record tonight, it is Michigan, Mississippi, Idaho, and Hawaii. Now, Steve Malzberg, earlier you used the phrase Super Tuesday 2. Let me take polite issue with that particular label. Instead, I've come up with my own acronym, taking the abbreviations for these states tonight. I'm calling it M&M High. Now, it is not a prep school for a candy maker. Instead, it's simply taking the states, and you've got them all in order. So henceforth, our shorthand for tonight's 4 contests will be M&M High. All kidding aside, Pete Hoekstra, I've got to ask you this because John Kasich, during our days in Congress, Kasich was steadfast in opposing most favored nation trading status for China. Yet I interviewed him on Sunday morning, and we played it back on Newsmax Prime last night. He said he had changed his thinking based on human rights and the comparative freedoms granted to Chinese Christians. Is that going to play in Michigan, Pete?
I'm kind of surprised. The interesting thing is trade agreements have come up in these town halls. I've been with John in 5 town hall meetings in Michigan in the last 4 or 5 days. China never came up. Trade did come up, and I think that John has been very, very forceful. Like I said, preferential treatment for China, most favored nation status never came up. But John has been very, very clear that when nations cheat on trade, he will hold them accountable. So he's may have changed his position on most favored nations, but he has made it very clear that whether it's China or anybody else cheating on trade agreements, they will pay a price and he will hold them accountable.
Steve Malzberg, obviously fair trade as opposed to absolute free trade is something that it would appear is a motivating factor tonight. That would seem to be right in the wheelhouse of Donald Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, people's eyes glaze over when they get into when people get into the weeds, not us, but when people get into the weeds on trade agreements, et cetera, it affects the people it affects. Most average people don't know and don't care. But when they hear the message coming from Donald Trump in his own way, in words that they could understand, and it's tough talk, that's what appeals to people, and especially in this climate. So, you know, we'll see how it plays out in Michigan. I think you got 2 groups of people. You got the people who might look at Kasich and be impressed by the policy wonkness of it, if you will. And then you got the straight talking, straight shooting Trump, and we'll see where the chips fall.
And already we are getting early numbers in. Less than half a percentage point of the precincts. Trump and Kasich tied. Cruz at 19%. Rubio at 8%. Pete Hoekstra, thanks to you. Steve and Betsy, stay right where you are. Our coverage of this particular night, which I've dubbed M&M High. Our election coverage will continue here on Newsmax TV.